Well, why don't we get this show on the road here, Rania? We want to turn to our first story, which is increasing tensions between South Africa and the United States after President Donald Trump and friends have taken up what they claim is a cause. That is the cause of the white South Africans who they claim are being brutally oppressed there in South Africa. It's quite the statement. But to get into the finer points of all of this, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Thapelo Mohapi, who's the General Secretary of Abahali-based Majondo, which is the shack dwellers movement in South Africa. Thapelo, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. There's a lot that's happening in the country, in the world. Thank you for being a media that is not captured and giving grassroots movements like ourselves an opportunity to vast our opinion in open. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And it's fantastic to have you all here. And Abahali, you just released a comprehensive statement on the issues going on between South Africa and the United States. And I guess my first question for you here, I mean, it seems absurd to even have to ask this, but I think it's important context for people who don't know. Is there some form of oppression being waged against white South Africans over land ownership? Because that's allegedly what Trump is alleging, that their land is being taken by the government, and that's a form of racism against white South Africans. So, I mean, is that a fair framing of what's really happening?
Yes, thank you once again for the opportunity. I want to make it very clear, explicit, that there is no white genocide in South Africa. The only oppressed and marginalized people in South Africa are the black majority who were dispossessed of their land through colonialism and further deprived of their own land and their own citizenship by the apartheid regime. The expropriation of land without compensation bill that was signed is nothing but a piece of paper that will not retain the land that was taken away from us. And I think it's a fear from the white South Africans, racist South Africans, who are Afrikaners, who took our land in 1652 when Jan van Riebeeck came to South Africa and dispossessed us of our land. And yet they are the ones who cry foul as if there's anything. But in anything, in 30 years of democracy, 70% of the land belongs to the 10% of the white minority, while we as black majority continue to live in the less parts of the land in this country. So there's no white genocide. The rich land, the farms, the wine lands in the Stellenbosch, in Cape Town, the rich land, the wealth of this country is still in the hands of the few white people that live in this country. So there's no white genocide, there's no land confiscation that is taking place, and there would be no land confiscation because what is going to happen, we are going to ensure that the land that was taken from our ancestors is returned back. So you can't confiscate something that belongs to you. Land was stolen from us, land was taken from us, and we cannot allow people like Trump, who are racist, white supremacists, who are going to tell us that the land reforms that is going to take place, and then the land reform is going to take place from below. It's the people on the ground who are going to take the land, not necessarily dispossessing, but we are taking what belongs to us, what was taken from our ancestors.
You know, I'm curious if you could speak to the fact that, many people do see this not just as a response to right-wing propaganda by Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who's also, of course, South African, but as a direct punishment for South Africa's leadership in bringing Israel to the ICJ over genocide in Gaza. So how does this attack on South Africa's economy and sovereignty fit into a broader pattern of retaliation against global South nations that are challenging imperialist powers?
Yes, we cannot. This is very clear that the stance that has been taken by South Africa in taking Israel into the International Court of Justice for the genocide, and that is the only genocide we know, not the white genocide. There's no. If in fact genocide took place in South Africa, it took place during apartheid. Black people were massacred by white people during apartheid because white people thought that they had the privilege and have the right and superior to actually remove black people and kill them. None of the white people have been massacred in a genocide. So, so that real genocide that is taking place on the people of Palestine, we commend South Africa for the work that they've done to ensure that they challenge the superior powers, such as that of Israel as well as the United States. So we are punished for that indirectly. We know what is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the use of Rwanda by the Western powers to actually challenge South Africa is exactly what is happening. They are using an indirect strategy to actually attack South Africa for the position that we have taken. And we are very proud of the stance that the government of South Africa has taken to ensure that Benjamin Netanyahu is recognized as a criminal and will be arrested if he goes to other countries, unless, of course, he goes to the United States of America. But this right wing that we are seeing in the world, in Mexico, in Argentina, and of course, to some extent, the right wing in the national government, in the government of national unity in South Africa, where we are seeing the right wing gaining its traction and so forth, is a worrying factor for us. And we are saying that we need to have a united front of the left in the world. We need to have humanity. We need to have people who are going to fight against these, maniac like your Trump of this world and your Netanyahu of this world. And we need to bring the world into humanity, because if we continue in this manner, we will have nowhere to go. I don't know. I mean, it is surprising that the richest people in the world are people who don't use their brain, like your Elon Musk. By the way, we are not proud that Elon Musk was born in South Africa. America can have him.
Well, listen, we
very
won't
nice of
call
you.
for him to be sent back. Don't worry at all. We don't want him either, but we don't want to.
We don't want him
inflict any more
either. We don't want him
damage,
either. Why would you do that? Why would you do that?
You know, one of the things that I thought was very notable about the statement you all made at ABM is you made the point that no matter what criticisms you've raised of the government in South Africa, you've never called for sanctions because of the impact it could have on average people. And you talk a little bit about the possibility of the impact to HIV/AIDS funding, AGOA, different things like that could come with U.S. sanctions. So talk about that, if you could, the real impact of sanctions on a personality, and why, despite having your own strong critiques of the ANC government, you've never called for that form of action against South Africa.
Thank you very much for that. We believe that these white Afrikaners, in terms of the solidarity and AfriForum, maybe I need to break down who are these people. These are the people who were privileged during apartheid, and they don't want to let go of their privilege. They continue to be racist. They continue to see white people as superior to black people. They are not, they're unpatriotic. They don't like black people. So their formation is actually to deal with black people, and particularly the poor and marginalized. So these are people who are against transformation, who do not want to be part of this country unless they are the ones who are leading. We have here a place called Rania, a state that is for Afrikaners. And it's clear, they're very clear that they don't want any black people in that area. They call it Afrikaner nationalism, and that only people who speak Afrikaans, who are white in color, must exist in that city. They want to even have their own currency within our own country. So these are people who don't want to be South Africans. I was very surprised when they were given an opportunity to take up asylum in the US and they refused. Because during apartheid, the very same people referred to themselves as European. In this country, we had separate amenities. If you want to go to the beach and swim, there were beaches for white people. And in those beaches, there was a written on the wall, non-European are not allowed in this particular area. And now they call themselves indigenous of South Africa, and they don't want to leave. It's because they know that they are living in a privileged society where they have everything, they have access to land and so forth. So it is very unfortunate that we have these sanctions that have imposed on us. A lot of people in our hospitals will suffer as a result of this. Staff will not be paid, and when staff is not paid, even we have the ARVs will not be distributed. As we speak right now, people are actually stressed and out of that get sickness before this even happens, because they don't know whether they are going to get their ARVs in the near future. But it shows of a government and leaders who do not care about the death, and this is a genocide on its own. When you deprive Black marginalized people of a health care, provision in terms of the ARVs. So it's a concern in our movement. We work with marginalized people. And when these were introduced, we have the Action Treatment Campaign, who fought against for ARVs to be provided in South Africa. And at that, before then, people were dying left and right like flies. So now that this is going to be removed, we are foreseeing a lot that is going to happen. So economically, people who are active in the economy, who are HIV positive, who have relied on these antivirals, will now suffer. Some of them will lose along the way. Of course, we know that in the AGOA, he's going to take away that. Before the Democrats came into power, Trump wanted to remove it in any way. These white racists who left South Africa for the US, and it's not only Elon Musk, there are others who are whispering in Donald Trump's ears, have hatred so much of Black people in this country that they would want Black people to be, to die in numbers. I don't know why, but there is a white supremacy campaign by certain white people who are in the US, who are now finding their place through the Trump administration, so that they can deal with, and these were white racists who did, when 1994 came and Black people were allowed to vote and Black people were actually running the country, they left the country and they are in the US. Now they get an opportunity to actually punish us. It is unfortunate that the Trump administration takes the advice of such people. So, Elon Musk is one of the beneficiaries of apartheid. His father was an engineer during apartheid, and he benefited from there. And then he went to Canada, and then ended up in the US. But he's a product of depriving Black people of education, the right to access the wealth, and so forth. So he's benefited from South Africa. He owes us, if anything, we can say that.
Mm-hmm.
It's really incredible. I'm just curious to know how this narrative coming out of the U.S., in addition to these actual material punishments from the Trump administration, how are they playing out among South African whites in South Africa?
Well, besides the solidarity, which is a white union representing, these are people who want to actually build an Afrikaner-only university. They are opposing laws that have been employed in South Africa when it comes to education, the Bella Bill, which allows Black people to go to any school, including the Afrikaner schools, because those schools benefited during apartheid, and they are more well-resourced than the Black school in the townships. They are against the NHI, which will ensure that Black people access the same health care. If the health care in this country drops, we are all going to have an effect, including the rich and the poor. If it improves, we all get a better healthcare system. They are against the expropriation of land without compensation. So, and of course, you have the AfriForum who represent the interest of Afrikaners. These people have built borders amongst themselves. They have their own security, private companies. They don't rely from government. They have everything. So we think that these people are getting funds from the US that we don't know about. And have been getting funds from the US that we don't know about, because they are running their own neighborhood, they are running their own country, within the country, and they do as they please. And we are seeing Black people who move into these suburbs being removed, called people who are causing chaos, people who are causing crime, people who are bringing noise and pollution. So we continue to be called what we were during apartheid. White people can call us anything that they want because they have security, they've built walls, and they can do whatever they want. So it is unfortunate that this is happening. However, we do have progressive white people who have said and come forward and said, I am an Afrikaner, but the interest of solidarity and that of AfriForum does not represent me. I'm a South African. I want to remain to be a South African. So there are people who are seeing the true colors of these racist people who are in our country. It is unfortunate that nothing has been done so far, because what they have done is amount to treason. And these organizations should be banned, and they should not be operating in South Africa, not because we are anti-whites, not because we are anti-Afrikaners, but because what they have done shows that they do not care about our country, that they can speak to governments. We want to make it clear as South Africans that we are a sovereign country. We will not be told by anyone. We will not, in fact, be bullied by any administration. And I hope that the government of South Africa, as neoliberal as it is, that it does not succumb to what Trump is saying. Trump cannot run this country. Maybe he can take over Greenland. Maybe he can take over Panama and other countries, but he should not come here. And if he does, we will, of course, have no other means but to defend our land. But expropriation without compensation will take place from below. This of the government, it's just a piece of paper. It doesn't say much. It speaks about government actually negotiating with the so-called landowners, those who stole the land. If negotiation fails, then government can actually expropriate without compensation. So it doesn't say expropriate without compensation, take our land back, but there are negotiations. If negotiation fails, then only then you can expropriate. So it doesn't, have any, guarantee for us as Black and marginalized people who are living in the urban areas, the urban poor, as well as in the rural areas.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Thapelo Mohapi, General Secretary of the Shack Dwellers Movement in South Africa, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. I want to say this, we have not been given an opportunity by other media houses, the ones that are captured, because we want to speak out. We want to send a narrative to everyone, because we are very glad that the United Nations has not taken that stance of the Trump of racist and white supremacy. But also we are very grateful that the European Union has come out to say, no, they support South Africa. But we would really want to actually to speak from a grassroots level and say, even though we do not agree with the South African government, but we love our country and we love our people, and we would never ever suppress our people to such an extent that we would speak bad about our country and ask for sanctions on South Africa, because we know sanctions does not impact the politicians in South Africa. It impacts the poor and marginalized in the grassroots level. So thank you very much for this opportunity. It's very rare for any media house to actually give us this opportunity.
Thank you.
I mean, I think it's really important that we were able to give him a platform to speak on that.
Yeah, no, I think so for sure. More to say about this, but maybe we'll swing back around to it. I know since we started a little late, we got our guests backed up here, so want to not have folks waiting too long. But yes, very critical. Shout out to ABM for coming on. For those of you who watched the Super Bowl, or maybe just were paying attention to the Super Bowl, many of you saw that during the Kendrick Lamar halftime performance, the flags of Sudan and Palestine were displayed. We are very, very honored to have with us here on the show Zül-Qarnaïn Nantambu, the Super Bowl halftime performer who brought out the Palestine and Sudanese flags. Zul, thank you so much for being with us.
Alhamdulillah, Zül-Qarnaïn. How you doing, my good man?
Oh, man, I'm doing very well, thank you. I appreciate you being with us, brother.
Is the audio good?
Audio is good. You're loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's an honor to be invited to this platform. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And I guess I'll just ask you the first question is what moved you during this moment to take this action, to bring out the flags of Sudan and Palestine?
Well, as we were going through the rehearsals, I just was reflecting on why I was chosen to be here, because I know we were doing a lot of rehearsals, 2 weeks, 8-hour days, and I'm like, I got a lot of other stuff I could be doing. I just was initially trying to get in the Super Bowl for free. And then I said, I bit off more than I could chew with all this commitment. I didn't know I had to commit to it that much. But then as I was pondering, I got inspired. I'm like, man, this is a big stage, and you're here, and you got to do something to try to bring some light to your Muslim brothers and sisters over the world who are oppressed, who are afflicted by genocide, and their human rights and liberties are violated. So as I pondered on it, the idea came to my head, and then the idea grew. I formulated it. Alhamdulillah, it was inspiration on how to enact, how to go about, demonstrating. Because at first I was like, I just was gonna get like some things that football players were under their eyes and put free guys under it and try to run the camera and hope that a camera could catch it, and for a split second people would see it. But then as I watched Kendrick Lamar do his show, because we did many rehearsals with him, and I saw like the symbolism that we all saw from Sam Jackson playing Uncle Sam, the men formulating the flag, and then that's what made me think about getting the flag for Gaza and for Sudan, because I'm really kind of tired with their communities, from many Palestinian brothers and sisters I know here in Sudan and in Canada, and Sudanese brothers and sisters I know here that share with me the atrocities of what's going on in their homeland. So I kind of got connected to them in that regard. And so God made a way, alhamdulillah, for everything to formulate.
Your act of protest has been, of course, widely praised, but we've also seen how artists and activists who take these stands on political issues, there's often this huge backlash, right? So I'm curious if you've experienced any consequences. I mean, maybe positive, maybe negative, but since the performance, and how do you see this moment contributing to the broader movement for Palestine and Sudan?
Well, in your two-part question, firstly, all risk, all sustenance, all provisions comes from Allah, comes from God. So I'm really not paying attention to any negative backlash or whatnot. I'm a financial freedom fighter. That means I'm an entrepreneur. So alhamdulillah, as long as I provide a service or provide a product, I'll be okay. Secondly, what was the second part?
Well, I was asking how you feel this actually benefits the broader struggle for Sudan and Palestine.
I just wanted to do my part. I didn't think in steps ahead of what it's going to do. I just was like, okay, you do your part, God will take care of the rest. But what I have seen is that it's strengthened a lot of people's faith, and because these are people of resilience and determination. And some people will say God is, or astaghfirullah. People might think that they've been forgotten about, or whatever. So this is a reassurance that God sees them, that God can use me and put me on the highest stage past 100 layers of security and put this flag in front of so many prominent people's faces in the world to see, and put it in front of the commander-in-chief who was just sitting with Netanyahu, sitting with this person. They see it with their own eyes, that they will be represented and they will be victorious, and they will not be just prone to cast aside those of Palestine and Gaza and the Sudanese that's going through these harsh atrocities. People around the world, whoever's supporting and financing the people that's causing harm. I don't know, I forgot the name of the army. I don't want to say it wrong, or the militia, or whatever the group is, but that's doing all these atrocities to women and children and displacing people and going in people's homes and just taking stuff and pillaging, and that at least it strengthens those who are afflicted by that fate that they're getting represented on the highest stage, and that they know that God is with them, so they should patiently persevere, and may Allah grant them relief and paradise in the next life. It may be a trial that'll grant them eternal success.
You know, I think a lot of people looked at what you did and thought, wow, this was powerful. This is amazing. Maybe one day I'll have an opportunity to say something. I guess, what would your message be for other people who are thinking they have some big stage coming up and they feel similarly about this or other issues, but are wondering if they should speak out or not?
I advise them to do a peaceful protest. Don't put your life in, don't do something that will be able to be misconstrued and used as a terrorist attack. Because I guess, but speak out. Use whatever resources you have. If you can help people financially, if you can use your tongue, if you can use your hands to stop it. But when I mean peaceful protest, I'm saying don't harm any innocent people. Because I'm from New Orleans, and the Super Bowl was in New Orleans, and just prior to that, they had a terrorist attack, and they aligned it with Islam or whatever group they aligned it with, and that's not of Islam. You know, we don't harm innocent people, we don't harm victims. So that's what I say. Definitely speak out, help. If you could donate money, time, energy, effort, but don't harm anybody that over here and try to align it with a movement of people who are struggling and fighting for freedom. They're fighting for their liberty. So that's what I say, but definitely do it.
Well, Zül-Qarnaïn, it was amazing to see. We appreciate you doing it, like millions of people around the world. And we appreciate you joining us and giving us some of your time.
Please follow my Instagram and TikTok. I have a YouTube platform, Open Book Platform. Go subscribe to the channel. It's on YouTube, it's on Instagram, it's on TikTok, and my personal IG is FFF, which stands for Financial Freedom Fighter, FFF_Zül-Qarnaïn, ZULQARNAIN. Send me a message, post something, I'm gonna repost you, whatever. It's all love. Peace and blessings. Have $1 million day.
Hey, appreciate you, man.
Well, that is incredible. And I hope to see more of that. I hope that act of protest inspires others who are artists to, put themselves out there and speak out on these kinds of issues. I think it also is important for people around the world to see that, people have not forgotten.
Yeah.
This is still an important issue.
It's ironic. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to speak to your point. I actually, even though I was watching the Super Bowl, I didn't catch it right away. And I actually learned about it from Palestinians posting it in social media, because everyone's talking about the halftime show. And I was like, wait a second, I got to rewind this. Like, how did I miss that? But, it was really amazing to get it from that. And it really ran around the whole world, and it dominated the whole conversation in the immediate moment on social media, at least. I don't know about it, people's, parties or whatever, but certainly you could see it was having a big impact. So yeah, cool action. I think an important thing to do. Glad that I was able to get those flags in. I think linking the two together, I'll just say this before we go on. Sudanese people are so supportive of Palestinians and always have been. I mean, if you know the history, Sudan is one of the strongholds for Palestine. And to some degree, part of how we ended up here is because the fear of the West and some Gulf states about not being able to go through with normalization if they brought in full democracy in Sudan. But I say that just to say that it just reminds me of something that we did something on Palestine here, and somebody who I know, a friend of the show in Sudan, messaged me and was living in Omdurman, and this was like in the height of the war, and was congratulating us, Breakthrough News, for having done this good coverage on Palestine. And I said, wow, that's like so amazing that you would even be thinking about this. And he was like, Sudan, Palestine, same struggle, same fight. So they really are linked. Like, it's not just putting the flags together. I mean, it's two peoples that have a long, deep history with one another in terms of solidarity struggles over the years. So cool to see, and I think a great historical background in many ways as well to that, Rania.
Absolutely.
Well, let's move forward with more news related to Palestine, and that's the ongoing ethnic cleansing agenda being pushed by the Trump administration and now trying to rope in close allies, Jordan and Egypt. And we are very, very honored to be joined once again here on the show by Ashish Prashar, who's a political strategist, former advisor to the Middle East peace envoy. As always, Ashish, great to have you here on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I guess we could start so many places. It feels like there's so many elements to this, but I'll just start with the Jordanian king. King Abdullah comes and he has the White House meeting with Trump. And of course, leading into it, he had made all these points. Well, we'll never take anyone out of Palestine. Then he says, we're going to take these 2,500 children. Now, of course, I think what he was meaning to say is people who needed medical care. So you don't want to say people who need medical care couldn't get it. But the way it felt, Ashish, was very like assuaging Trump. Like, okay, I know I said all this, but I don't want to seem like when I'm next to him that I'm not for ethnic cleansing fully. So let me say something that maybe will make him like it. I mean, it just spoke to just the thuggishness of how Trump is proceeding here with the so-called his reconstruction plan with Gaza.
Well, Trump's new strategy seems to be ethnically cleanse Palestinians or kiss your aid goodbye. He's holding Egypt and Jordan hostage by threatening to cut off billions in aid unless they accept Palestinian refugees fleeing this genocide. But Trump seems to think that this financial leverage makes it a slam dunk. He can strong arm both nations into accepting ethnically cleansing refugees from Gaza. What's truly remarkable here is Trump's failure to understand the realities of the Middle East. His overestimating US influence while grossly underestimating the resilience of the Palestinian people who, Palestinian people have already said they're not leaving. The Palestinian struggle for liberation is not a pawn in Trump's diplomatic chess game. And it's certainly not something that can be solved by bribing nations who can also, by the way, get that money from other Gulf states that they're partners with. Look, for the king's part, the king didn't mention Palestinian interests once when when they were discussing forcibly displacing them. The interests of everyone involved, he described as. He prioritized the interests, frankly, of the US by sitting there while Trump was talking about ethnic cleansing than even his own nation. I understand people are going to say he's stuck between a rock and a hard place and is trying to maneuver without losing Jordan's privileges or causing himself domestic upheaval. But the reality is Jordan has done very little in the last 16 months to support the Palestinian cause. We've talked about this in the past. They've actually helped the land bridge, when Yemen has put, their people at risk by blocking the Red Sea from, supplies getting to Israel. Jordan helped facilitate the Saudi land bridge to get, goods and resources to Israel while there was less ways to get it there in the first place through shipping, and Jordan have said, openly, their foreign minister said, we will not, the displacement is off the table, but that's the least they can do. They could have ended this genocide alongside other neighbors in the region who haven't sacrificed anything either. And I'm excusing Lebanon from this, who've given up a great cost, but the other neighbors who basically sat there and let it take place when they could literally have enforced a blockade and shut down the Israeli occupation in a month.
Ashish, I think it's so interesting how Trump does this thing where he thinks that it's going to benefit the US, but actually either way you shoot yourself in the foot. And here's what I mean by that. So Jordan and Egypt receive a massive amount of aid from the US, and it largely helps to prop up these regimes, these police states, in the case of Jordan, a monarchy, that act in service to US empire and have normalized with Israel. And basically, like you just said, will actually collaborate with the Israelis against the Palestinians. That said, that US aid makes that possible, makes the stability of their regimes possible. However, if Palestinians are ethnically cleansed into Jordan and Egypt, this would also destabilize these US-backed regimes for a number of reasons. So it really puts the Jordanians and Egyptians, but I think more so the Jordanians because they're a bit weaker, between a rock and a hard place. And I'm just like, if you're Trump and you're the people of his administration, do you not recognize that either way you're like screwing over your ally? And also, this is why, of course, the Saudis and the Emiratis care too, because these people, I mean, they don't care about Palestinians, despite what their rhetoric might say. They do care about the stability of the Egyptian and Jordanian regimes, though, because they attach that to their own stability. So I'm just curious if you can speak to those contradictions and whether you think the Trump administration or the people that are maybe surrounding Trump are aware of all these contradictions?
Well, I'm actually grateful to Trump. He's admitted in that room there's been a genocide. I think people have, with all the ethnic cleansing conversation, people have, jumped over the fact that he literally said, without using the word, that he's seen the end of a civilization. Who caused that was Netanyahu and obviously the previous administration, but openly saying that is really important. But also his open lawlessness, his obvious ignorance to international diplomacy, his public bullying, and, I guess we could call trademark vulgarity at this point, have pulled back the curtain on the reality of the US empire for everyone, frankly, in the region too, because it's like, we're only going to care about ourselves and this little colony that we want to keep there in Israel. Actually, all of you in the Middle East who we've said are our allies are kind of disposable too. You're going to take this deal or not. Otherwise, you're going to have problems yourself. He does not care about the domino effect on those Middle Eastern nations. Even those who did not want to see this under previous administrations are now forced to admit the reality of what, frankly, Biden has set up for Trump and the ruthlessness of the United States right now in this moment. And frankly, hopefully this will compel countries in the Middle East, Europe, and hopefully the global south to finally build an escape route from this US hegemony, because frankly, they're showing the world they'll throw everyone away. I will say this though, Biden proposed the same thing to the Egyptians. They proposed this, and this has all been reported in Israeli media and in the US. They proposed taking the Palestinians to Sinai, and the Egyptians pushed back because they do understand that upheaval. And I just think that watching Sisi cancel his visit and put out his own plan to rebuild Gaza with Palestinians in there, he's already aware that he would lose his country tomorrow, frankly, I believe, if he was Palestinians were pushed into his country. And he would be deposed. And I really believe that, because no one would accept this. I think the majority of the Arab populations across all those countries, support the Palestinians. Jordan, like you said, is the more vulnerable one, because, there's the estimates that 35% of Jordanians are Palestinian. I think the estimate actually is 85%. If you think about descendants of refugees from the Nakba who've had kids and grandkids, they might be Jordanian, but they're also Palestinians. So that support is huge. And I would foresee the uprooting of both those administrations if they were forced into the situation. I think the thing that those administrations or those effective dictatorships can account for is, I think they can make up the pool that Trump would threaten to remove. I think the UAE, the Saudis, to your point, are going to throw that money at them so they don't have to take in those refugees, and they can say no to Trump the same way they both said no to Biden.
No, I think it's a great point. And we have some proof of concept in Egypt, since we know that many of the organizing circles that brought down Mubarak started in the aid relief between Palestinians who came across from Gaza in 2008 and Egyptians who came to help them obtain the things that they needed for their human rights. And, I'm glad you raised the point about Biden having also proposed this, because, it does, I think, also speak to the sort of long-term agenda here of ethnic cleansing, because, I can even remember in the Oslo period in the 90s, that's what they were saying is, the Gaza is going to be a Riviera on the Mediterranean and all these other things. It's this long-term vision to get Palestinians out of Gaza and to turn it into some sort of commercial opportunity. But it does feel like there's probably many of these moments every single day, but like this didn't just start yesterday. This really is it's not just Trump, it's not just Biden, it's the culmination of a long-term set of plans.
I think it's American foreign policy. It's been American foreign policy for decades. Reagan, Clinton, Bush 1, Bush 2 probably was the least problematic on Palestine specifically. Obama, while they all say gestures, they always talk about the work they've done to try to bring peace to the region. I can't look to anything they've done over that entire timeline that shows they've actually cared about the lives of the Palestinians. All they've done is help the Israeli occupation expand their land grab, given them excuses to do this, offered deals that took away Palestinian territory. I remember Clinton still today says he offered Yasser Arafat the deal of a lifetime by losing all his territory, the deal of a lifetime. So everyone's angry that Donald Trump is being so blunt. I think Americans are angry that he's blunt because he really just pulls the mask off of who America is. I think Western leaders are angry at Donald Trump's vulgarity in this because it pulls the mask off of what the West is. They're so used to being unified and gaslighty together that they can't accept that this is actually who they really are. You only have to look what he's doing right now, and I don't mean to switch topics, with Russia and Ukraine. The West is already kind of shaking, with that, with his move to say he's not going to let Ukraine into NATO. You're seeing England and Britain and France and everyone else say, how could he? you know, because he's showing, frankly, that America has only ever cared about America itself and whatever interest it has in any region.
You know, I think about the fact that these are red lines, the ethnically cleansing of Palestinians into Jordan and Egypt. It's red lines for Jordan and Egypt. It's been a red line, as you mentioned. Biden did try to sell this to Egypt, and it was a hard no. Like, there's no amount of money that you can give us for us to allow this to happen. So, and like you said, the Gulf states may, even if they really do pull aid, the Americans, the Gulf states may step in and fill in the gap because it's tied to their stability as well. So with all that in mind, you know, we watched this also in parallel. Ceasefire has happened in Gaza, and it's kind of on the precipice of perhaps breaking down, perhaps not, but it's always seeming like it could easily break down and fall apart, and we could return to genocide. We know the Israelis aren't finished, and they would actually really like to return to destroying whatever is left of Gaza, including the people there. And I'm raising all that to say, you know, it seems like we may be reaching a point where Gaza is just, for an indefinite period of time, a place of rubble and people with nowhere to go who are just perpetually or, you know, frequently being subjected to mass bombardment. And that is just kind of the normal. I mean, it's a horrifying prospect, but I don't know. I'm just curious, like, what you think about where this could go, because I just don't see anything else but that in the future right now.
I mean, you obviously personally can attest to how Israel never actually has never ceased fire. It's happening in Lebanon right now, right? So are we surprised the occupation has failed to uphold its promises on this first phase? Under, you know, the terms of the deal, they were required to send hundreds of thousands of tents into Gaza, a massive amount of aid, and they failed to do so. Couple that with the fact that the Israeli occupation has basically failed to cease fire. They've killed, I think, over 100 Palestinians now. They've injured nearly 1,000 through direct targeting. This isn't just accidental targeting, you know, and this is all since January 19. You know, it's been established beyond doubt that the occupation is to blame for this precarious state of the ceasefire today. And that's not coming from me or you. That's coming from inside the occupation's regime, its military, who've briefed their own media and the New York Times. And if you want to go back to facts, as you all know, the Israeli occupation has, I think, signed 6 ceasefire agreements with the Palestinian resistance since 2008. That's 8, 12, 14, 19, 21. Each time, they are the ones who breach and violate the ceasefire. And the international community has no reason to trust they will continue this. I think, you know, Netanyahu, as you point out, is hell-bent on breaking the ceasefire, but it's never really stopped, to your point. Like, the ethnic cleansing just moved to the West Bank. You know, they have arrested more people, by the way, or detained and held without charge more people than they are releasing to the Palestinians right now. They are killing people and killing children in the West Bank indiscriminately. And yes, they'd probably like to start this whole thing again. The only promising news is, since Trump's bombastic, you know, his, what does he likes to say, all hell will break loose if, you know, hostages aren't released on Saturday. I always think that's not just directed at Hamas. I think it's directed at the Israeli regime too, you know, because Hamas stood firm. And because the occupation is genuinely violating the ceasefire, especially the aid part that everyone's focused on, the very occupation, by the way, that said it would arm and get ready for Saturday. When Trump said those remarks, 801 trucks of aid entered Gaza. You know, the Israeli occupation today basically caved to Hamas again and lost again because, you know, everyone watching knows that they're the one breaching the agreement, and even the Americans. And I think the Americans, I go back to what little bits of hope we can look for, is I think Donald Trump doesn't want this to continue to be front page news for 4 years. Now, does that mean ethnic cleansing will not continue in the region? You know, I don't think so. But I don't think the Israeli military want to go toe-to-toe with Hamas anymore. They're exhausted and actually took a massive loss. Again, reported in their media today by their own generals and their own media that it was a humiliating loss on the ground. And I think the only thing that's going to change this, like how aggressively they go after it, is whether they get the green light to annex the West Bank, which I believe at some point in this administration they will get that green light, but they're already doing that discreetly. And I think if Trump's version of ethnic cleansing is a quiet ethnic cleansing that isn't in the media, that does not mean drop 2,000, 5,000 pound bombs and make it the front page of every news outlet in the world, or or a broadcast channel. He wants it done by settlers and other people and other means, maybe starvation. This is all horrible, but it also gives the Palestinian resistance the chance to fight back. It also gives other people who support this the ability to, if it's not taking place in this aggressive manner, to rally around Palestinians and fight back against the Israeli occupation.
That's a great point. And, we're seeing it on multiple levels. I mean, last time we had you when we were talking about football, we saw Celtic, come out with the huge give Israel the red card. Obviously, that's going to continue on a range of different fronts. So I guess that's always you hate to say silver lining in the cloud, but the element of this that I think we can't ignore is that this huge mass popular movement has erupted. Some governments are, at least doing something in relationship to that, and there may be more there. But Ashish, as always, it really is an honor to have you here. Great to have you sorting through all these issues, helping us get on top of them. Ashish Prashar, thanks so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side. Rania?
Oh, yes, Eugene. I just want to point out that here in Lebanon, a crazy thing happened today.
Yes.
There was an Iranian plane that was like a commercial airliner that had obviously Lebanese people on board that was supposed to land in Beirut. The Israelis are claiming that it has money that Iran is sending to Hezbollah on it, therefore it can't land. So the Lebanese Minister of Public Works, I think they're called, was like, okay, I guess it can't land, which is actually horrible. Like, what, you don't have to listen to Israel. So now there's mass protests outside the Beirut airport of people angry because it's Lebanese citizens who can't come to their country because they're on an Iranian flight. The Israelis are telling a sovereign country cannot land because they think there's money on it. It's just the most insane thing imaginable. Like, that's the behavior of an occupier. And that's the situation that the region is in today, is with Israel just behaving like it owns everything. And I mean, I don't even know, like, I'm not sure, is Israel threatening to bomb this plane if it lands? I'm not really sure what the deal is there. Or why does Israel even have a say about what money comes in or out of Lebanon?
Exactly. You're hitting on so many different crucial points there, I think. And I saw some of the protests, but it's outrageous. I mean, to tell a plane full of the citizens of a country it cannot land, they're on a pilgrimage, they're coming back to where they live. I mean, where are they supposed to go? I mean, it's not like not that it would be right if it was anyone else. It's Lebanon's airspace, but like, it's not a plane full of Iranians, it's a plane full of Lebanese people trying to go home. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays. I believe I don't know, I've never been to Beirut. There's only one road, right? So now it's blocked, the one road.
The airport road. Yeah. I mean, there's mass protests basically at the airport. They're really, really big, actually. Because people are pissed because it's a violation of Lebanese sovereignty. And also, I mean, the irony here, and I know we have another guest we're gonna have on in just a moment, but the irony here, Eugene, is that the American and Israeli talking point is that Lebanon is under Iranian occupation. Well, if that's the case, why are there Israeli troops occupying Lebanese villages? They refuse to leave, and they're trying to stay forever, actually, and at least 5 of them. And why is it the Israelis that are telling Lebanon which planes can and cannot land? And I don't see Iranian troops in Lebanon, so I don't know what that's about. But yeah, it's just the irony of accusing the projection, I should say, the projection of saying Iran occupies Lebanon when the U.S. and Israel are literally telling the country what it can and cannot do.
Couldn't say it better myself. I think the Israelis might say that, like, you are the Iranian troops in Lebanon. That's anyone they don't like is an Iranian asset.
It's an interesting interpretation.
It's the hidden occupation that you just don't see. But it'll be very interesting to follow, and I'm glad you mentioned that point as well about the ongoing occupation. I mean, it's outrageous. The bombings, the drones, the psychological
burning of homes.
warfare.
They're still burning homes in the South just every single day. They bulldoze and burn down people's homes.
It's fallen. I do. You're right. We do need to move on, but it's like it's fallen out of the news too. You know what I mean? So it's like the level of impunity is so high because it's not in the New York Times. I mean, maybe it is, but it's not high up there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So everyone who was kind of thinking, oh, something was happening in Lebanon, is now thinking like, oh, I guess it's over. It was a ceasefire. And then after it's off the front pages, you do even more. Which, interestingly enough, and I'll just say this and then I'll move on. Netanyahu actually once said many years ago that Israel had made a huge mistake during the Tiananmen Square issue, and that when the whole world was focused on Tiananmen Square, Israel should have conducted a massive displacement and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians because no one would have known it was happening. So it just sort of speaks to the mentality of these people. But let's move forward here. Another huge issue, speaking of Trump, obviously the ongoing deportation wave. One of the centers of that has been the Denver area, where, of course, Aurora, Colorado was one of the places during the presidential campaign that was heavily highlighted by Trump by being taken over by quote-unquote criminals and so on and so forth. A lot going on there in terms of people pushing back against this deportation wave. We are very, very happy to be joined here by Katie Leonard, who's an organizer in Denver with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Katie, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, great to have you here. This past Saturday, I know there was a large demonstration in Denver. I know in Denver, Aurora, the broader sort of metro area, a lot's going on. Maybe just give us a capsule view, the 20,000 foot, of what the response of the community has been to the targeting of this area, one of the most targeted areas in terms of ISIS deportation wave.
Yeah, I mean, with Operation Aurora, we've been under attack here in Colorado since even before Trump took office. And we've seen a massive response even before raids began. Huge numbers of people were ready to struggle, ready to protest and organize, and really just reject this racist narrative that immigrants are criminals, right? Here in Aurora, like 1 in 5 people are immigrants. If you're not an immigrant, you know an immigrant, you love an immigrant, you work or go to school with an immigrant, and you can't attack 20% of a population and everyone who loves them and expect people to just like lay down and take it. People here are standing up and like really ready to fight back.
Yeah, I'm curious if you could explain how exactly Aurora, Colorado has become this focal point for both right-wing and anti-immigrant agitation and the community-led resistance to it. And also, I'm curious how the Trump mass deportation policies that are being implemented and all the rhetoric around it has actually emboldened the far right in the area.
Yeah, I think it's really important people know that this struggle here, really this narrative about, criminals taking over Aurora started way back this past summer of 2024 in July. And it was the seeds for Operation Aurora were planted by a right-wing city council person named Danielle Drinsky and this slumlord CBZ management. There was essentially a narrative that took off in the right-wing media that Venezuelan gangs were taking over apartment complexes here. Right-wing politicians like Danielle Drinsky really carried that narrative. The media also played a big role in just the way that took off. And it emboldened people and the right wing to the extent that you had some right-wing vigilantes in these neighborhoods, in these apartment complexes, armed folks that were coming to sort of harass people that live at these apartment complexes, which is really ridiculous. And this is all sort of a result of really a huge influx of Venezuelan people we've had come to Colorado in the past 3 years or so, something like 40,000 Venezuelan folks. And right-wing politicians are running with this narrative, and it has real human impact, of course. And people are fed up with it. It could have been maybe, seen as an attack on one group at the time, like Venezuelans specifically, but people have started to see, right? We've seen this before, and it could be any sort of immigrant group that comes under attack in the same way. So really all of our immigrant communities and everyone, else, their allies are standing up and they're fed up. They're over it, really.
Well, one question I have is I guess, how's it going for ICE? Because I saw Mr. Homan went on Fox News and seemed very upset that, people had been telling people their legal rights. But nonetheless, I wonder if there's been a real, sorry, I almost dropped something there, a real inability for them to fully carry out, what they were sort of threatening, in the lead up here.
Yeah, last week we saw a literal army of federal agents be unleashed on our community, from like ATF, CPB, DEA, FBI, US Marshals, ICE, you name it. They came into our communities. I think like they said something like 400 agents, military vehicles, guns, armor. It was extremely militarized. And they said they were targeting, 100 violent criminals. But what they really did was go door to door at apartment complexes in Denver and Aurora, asking people things like if they speak English, if they're citizens, demanding people show them their papers. And that really, it really was clear to people by then that, okay, these aren't targeted raids, right? They're really here to terrorize folks. And they actually weren't able to pick up. I mean, one person taken by ICE is one too many, right? But they weren't able to just round up people indiscriminately because people do know their rights. And that's a big result of the fact that community has been spreading know your rights information. And that is like a barrier to ICE being able to just scoop people up here in Colorado and across the country. And Tom Homan has been upset, obviously visibly in the news about things happening across the country, but especially here in Colorado. It was a real failure for them. It was a real embarrassment. Media sort of caught from every angle the way that they failed because people know their constitutional rights and community is standing with, their immigrant neighbors.
I want to tie in a couple of things here, and that is, when it comes to the issue, and you already alluded to this, when it comes to the issue of immigration in the U.S., the struggle for justice extends far beyond any one administration or one party, right? Because you were talking about how some of these issues were taking place even before Trump came along. Excuse me. So I guess, can you talk a bit about you mentioned last summer and the right wing, but also what were you facing when it came to these issues under the Biden administration? And I think it's important to always remember that this is a bipartisan problem because people tend to associate it with the Republicans because their rhetoric is just so much more abhorrent. So that's one. And two, how would you tie this into violent policing? And I say this in terms of specifically Aurora, because Aurora has a history of violent policing. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is the murder, for example, of Elijah McClain. And of course, there's the city's collaboration with ICE. So I'm just curious how violent policing ties together with what's going on right now. And I know this is like a two-pronged question. I always do this, so please forgive me. But also just, giving attention to the fact that this is a bipartisan problem.
Yeah. I mean, as we all know too, like it's not just Biden, but you go back to the Obama administration and Obama was nicknamed the deporter in chief, right? And you hear from a lot of people here in the community, the things they've been going on for a long time under Democrats, under Republicans, right? It is bipartisan. And I mean, what happened this past summer with really what's a slumlord teamed up with politicians, but they faced no real pushback from like the Democratic administration, right? Like this narrative was allowed to just be carried and taken off. Like we didn't have, any sort of protections from politicians. Like Democratic, liberal, quote unquote, progressive politicians locally weren't, standing up and leading the fight back. Like it's been people that have been leading the fight back to all of this since even before Trump came into office. That's very, very clear. I think when it comes to policing, it's really interesting here in Colorado because we actually have quite a bit of state legislation that protects immigrant folks. And one of those things sort of prevents police from collaborating with ICE in a variety of ways. So actually, when they came with all of these federal agencies last week, there was no police present at any of these raids, which is really interesting. But that's because of Colorado law. So there is a concern always, I think, of like what they are willing to do. And when I say they, I mean like Aurora police, right? Because they do have a history of racist, violent policing. And as we know, like the Department of Justice has suspended like federal oversight on these police departments who have like records, their own data shows of racist policing. So there is a sort of trepidation here, I think, in some ways, to just waiting to see what they may do,
You know, one of the aspects that you've raised that I think is really important is the fact that so much of this narrative was started with the assistance, not just of a politician, but a slumlord company working there. And that feels like an important angle, the fact that we have, you know, so many communities, working class communities, immigrant communities crowded into these slums. I mean, does it feel like in some ways those forces are similar to how a lot of employers a lot of times, you know, will use ICE, are in a way want to increase the fear factor because they don't want their immigrant tenants to raise any issues about how they're operating?
Yeah, I mean, most certainly. You can't actually find, I don't think, a more perfect example of how, you know, these slumlords who, they're capitalists, right? They're very wealthy landowners who are running these slums, right? Charging thousands of dollars. They have a lot of immigrant folks who are in these apartment complexes, and they're not repairing anything. Like when you look at the buildings that this company who started a lot of this narrative back last summer, CBZ, these buildings were like, there were some units with no running water, and people were paying like $2,000 a month to live there. And folks get like trapped in these apartments, right? Because maybe they can't get approved anywhere else. And so they're raising concerns, and to the point where this slumlord, actually, the mayor of Aurora, who is not progressive, right, called this company a slumlord, right? And it's true. It's undisputed. They've been taken to court. And so they very opportunistically like latched on to this narrative about Venezuelan gangs taking over an apartment complex in order to pin the problems that they're causing on immigrants, right? On their tenants, who are actually the ones that are experiencing, you know, all the violence from these landlords. So it's a really, really clear example of how these business owners, big business owners, team up with, you know, local politicians and the right, and it sort of takes off, and it causes real human costs, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Well, Katie, I have to say it's really been very interesting to see what's been taking place there in Denver, and we will continue to follow it on all the levels that we can. And we really appreciate you being willing to come on the show and enlighten folks to what's actually happening out there. Katie Leonard, organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, thanks so much for some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
So, Eugene,
Rania,
I have something to complain about.
Okay.
We have, get ready. We have 670-ish people watching the stream right now, but it's weird. I only see 464 likes. So I just feel like some people aren't doing their part. You guys, you gotta hit the like button. It's like the least you can do. Smash the like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. It demonstrates your enthusiasm for breakthrough news. And also it makes us feel good to have the likes well, at the end of the day. Come on, man. So look, everybody needs some validation, okay?
Yes.
It's good to know you're not just screaming into a black hole of nothingness.
True.
Where everybody hates you.
Yeah.
So smash that like button. I almost cursed.
Like button.
Thank you that you did not. This is a family show, so we don't want any cussing here. No cussing at all.
I don't know who's enforcing that. Okay, whatever. So
I'm enforcing
the point is, smash that like button. I'm not going to say it again. I'm going to actually see how many people listened. Like, I feel like as many people who are watching the stream should have personalized. Okay, we're at 555 now. So I'm going to check back on it. I'm going to check back on it, but I feel like we can do better than that.
I agree. Don't make it hard for me trying to stop Rania from cussing, guys. Make it easy for me. This is like 1990s TV here. There's no cussing. It's like Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Anyway, I don't even.
It was a great show. I used to watch that show as a kid.
Yeah. I don't even want to get into my whole feeling about how much cussing they're allowing on network TV these days before 10 p.m. But we'll have a whole special show actually about that. Nonetheless, quickly before we go to our last guest, I wanted to raise an issue with you, Rania, that I think is kind of a follow up on something we were talking about last week, about sort of how we view the different actions by the Trump administration and Mr. Hegseth. I'm not exactly sure how to say it. My apologies to you, sir. The Secretary of Defense, spoke recently, yesterday, I believe it was, day before yesterday, about Ukraine, number of different fronts. And long story short, the way it's being spun in the media is that like the U.S. is like stepping back from NATO and all these other things. And so, I think some people are like, oh, Trump taking on the deep state, taking on NATO, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that's what's happening here, similar to other things. But before I say too much, I just want to play a clip of some of his speech that I think speak to a little bit about what this is really about, but maybe kind of a continuation on some of what we were talking about last week.
NATO is a great alliance, the most successful defense alliance in history. But to endure for the future, our partners must do far more for Europe's defense. The peace dividend has to end. There are autocrats with ambitions around the globe, from Russia to the communist Chinese. Either the West awakens to that reality and creates combat multipliers with their allies and partners, to include NATO, or we will abdicate that responsibility to somebody else with all the wrong values.
So, there really is, I think, Rania, despite all the people, including, by the way, a lot of people who are Trump supporters, trying to spin this as some great attack on NATO and Atlanticism and whatever, like the U.S. imperial agenda or whatever. That's what it's really about, as you can hear from his comments, is we just need Europe to do more of the fighting against Russia, who meant he noted that Russia was an enemy, didn't have the same values as America, blah, blah, blah. So we need Europe to do more to fight Russia so we can do more to fight China and, maybe have a nuclear war on either front. We just want the nuclear war that starts in Europe to be started by Germany or someone, not the United States. I mean, it's not really a change in policy. It's a change in emphasis, and it's a desire to push U.S. allies more in Europe, at least, who, I would sort of agree has been getting a little bit of a free ride off American military, more into the front lines, of the same global conflict to maintain unipolar U.S. hegemony. And I'll just note here quickly before I get your response, Rania, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Policy, which is an important position that a lot of people don't know about now, is Elbridge Colby. People maybe follow Bridge, as he's known, very prolific on X and other social media. He wrote a book called Strategy of Denial. He's the grandson of a famous CIA head, by the way, real blue blood kind of guy. But his entire sort of purpose since he left the first Trump administration was to do just this, was to try to argue that America should do less in Europe, should push the allies to do more, because the only way to truly counter China is a massive military buildup, the likes of which the world has never seen, that could not take place if the U.S. is also engaged in a military buildups in other parts of the world. So we need to do this war with China so majorly, we actually need our allies to do a little bit more dying and fighting and spending money on frivolous weapon systems that don't work. We need them to do more of that while we do less of that in Europe and do more of it in Asia. I mean, to portray this as anything other than just a shifting of the deck chairs of the same U.S. imperial policy, I think is criminal malpractice.
Yeah, the way it's framed is like, oh, the U.S. withdrawing from Europe. No, it's just, or some people will frame it as, oh, the U.S. or the Trump administration is calling for the Europeans to take up the slack for their own defense. And I'm like, it's not defense that the U.S. is doing for Europe. They literally dragged them into a war with Russia. That's the opposite of defense, actually. I think what's interesting here, Eugene, is it just kind of shows how Europe has no sovereignty. And, it would be great if the U.S. stepped back and then Europe actually took a hold of its own it went its own path. But the thing is, Europe is just stacked with leadership that is indoctrinated in the Atlanticist mentality because they're all educated in American institutions that Trump also wants to defund. Sorry, it's I just have constant whiplash over what's happening. But yeah, I agree with what you said. And I think that the interpretations of it are a bit silly and nonsensical, especially when it's looked at as isolationist. For one, this is not isolationist. This is just wanting Europe to basically do America's wars, to step up and do America's wars more for on Europe's behalf, do wars that are actually bad for Europe so that the US can take the world down to apocalypse with war with China.
No, I think that's 100% correct. I mean, we're seeing the long-term impact of U.S. Cold War policy coming home to roost in Europe. I mean, in the immediate post-war era, many of the elites in Western European countries sought to retreat under the U.S. military umbrella as the only way they saw to maintain any power and influence in neo-colonialism or whatever they could preserve of their colonial empires, even though U.S. made them give up a lot of that, but allowed them to perpetuate neo-colonialism and to prevent themselves from being overthrown in their own countries, where you had a significant number of people who were for peace, who wanted to work with the Soviet Union. You had large communist parties that were a center of that, and that, ultimately the possibility of elites being significantly displaced in Europe. And we're talking about Europe here, like the center of historic absolutist capitalist feudal empire. Like these people who for thousands of years have been ruling the world, they didn't want to be sidelined, and they were willing to subordinate themselves to American power. And you can see those same elites now would rather destroy their own economy in order to not break their relationship with the United States, because they view unipolar hegemony of the United States as protecting their brands. You think about Unilever, big company, UK Dutch company. You think about Royal Dutch Shell, big company, UK Dutch company. I mean, I'm just giving you all these different companies. They feel the US, by defending the West against the rest, is ultimately defending them too. And for them, that's true. For the average European, it's not true. But it does show how much the two economies being linked together in that post-World War II period under American leadership is causing so many problems for them today. And yes, as you say, they just want Europe to fight more. It's a changing of that Cold War era. But this is exactly why, when the first Bush administration was talking about what their strategy was going to be towards the expansion of NATO, or potential expansion of NATO, Brent Scowcroft, who was the national security advisor for George H.W. Bush, he wrote in a note, he basically said, we have to do everything possible to get between Germany and Russia. And that one of the biggest fears, I wrote an article about this, is NATO really to blame at the beginning of the Ukraine war for all of this. The number one U.S. fear was that after the fall of the Warsaw Pact, that Western Europe would want to work with Russia and would establish security and economic cooperation that worked for Russia, that worked for Europe, but that would make them more autonomous from the United States. And so a huge part of why NATO continually expanded eastward was to try to leverage the Central and Eastern European countries against Western Europe to make sure that there couldn't be a European arrangement that worked for all sides, so that the U.S. could maintain pole position. So we're seeing that, just a different iteration and growth of this. But I think just people have to be on guard. USAID, NATO, NED. I mean, these things are being used very provocatively by the Trump administration, by Elon Musk and others, to make what they're doing seem like it's not what they're actually doing. Like they just came out that the State Department is likely going to give Tesla a $400 million contract to have armored cyber trucks for the State Department. Now, Elon Musk does not want you talking about that. He would much rather you be talking about DEI at USAID. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot going on here that they're trying to rearrange some things. They're trying to move some things around, and they're cynically manipulating the well-earned hatred that many people in the United States and outside of it have for certain institutions that have not really been harbingers of good. But if we can't see behind that, it's just setting yourself up. Just like the Democrats are misleading people, the Republicans are misleading people. People have to stop recognizing you can't follow one of these two false, prophets here. Like people really have to take politics into their own hands and shape the world they want to see, not wait for some savior to come from the White House and solve their problems.
But it's also interesting because I think to some degree, like a segment of the ruling class has bought into some of the propaganda that they push into the for the rest of us to keep us divided. So like, for example, I think that Elon Musk and Donald Trump really believe that communists might be running the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
Like, I really think that they think that every single Black person in the military was hired because of DEI. Like everything is just like anybody who's not white is DE. Like, I think they really believe that. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because it's like the ruling class is kind of like attacking, and it's not in the good way or a right way. It's just they're shooting themselves in the foot a little bit with some of these like attacks that are, yes, some of them are explainable because people are profiting off of them, obviously. At the same time, some of them just seem like they've watched too much of their own propaganda. So it's an interesting moment. And I think that's why it's so confusing for a lot of people, because some of it makes sense. And then some of it's like, what? You know what I mean? It's just, anyway.
Yeah, no, it's astonishing. I said to someone the other day, I was like, I think this is the design too, to make it so, as you mentioned earlier, kind of whiplash effect, like surreal, like what is really happening kind of thing here. So it's harder for people to get their bearings because, yeah, it really is. It really is wild. And I think you're right. I think they do. I mean, I think they do believe it for sure. I mean, I think that a lot of these people, look, they're steeped in 500 years of white supremacy in America, which, is so closely linked to capitalism and this sort of fake meritocracy that is allegedly attached to capitalism, which is in no way, shape, or form a meritocracy, that really does believe that the idea that historic discrimination should be redressed is somehow saying that there should be a diminishment of expertise, merit, or skill, which is not what affirmative action is about, has been about, or could be about in terms of the nature of what it's trying to accomplish. You want to have more people able to become doctors, not have people who will fail at keeping the medical system going. So, I mean, the whole thing is just wrapped in whatever, but you think it wasn't that long ago, Charles Murray in 1996 wrote the bell curve that said Black people were hereditarily less intelligent than whites. He's still around, Charles Murray. He's still commenting on a regular basis. He's actually now extended his analysis beyond just Black people. And he now says actually he was wrong. It's just all poor people have some sort of hereditary thing. So he's like, he didn't realize before that poor whites were also basically just as bad as Blacks, but it's a cultural disease, a hereditary. You can go in and look at it. It's all nonsensical pseudoscience, really. But you look at these people who come from the Republican milieu, the Stephen Millers of the world, they come out of this world that was in the 1990s, especially very heavily pushing and trying to revive scientific racism in a way that they're now building into this reality. And I think it's notable. And, I saw someone say this online. I wish I could remember who it was so I could credit them, but they made the point that they're also doing a favor for these corporations who are all about DEI, that none of them really wanted to do this, but because, non-white people in this country, working class people in this country have made serious and significant demands and movements demanding to be recognized and have their humanity honored in the country, that they had to come up with some sort of something to make it look like they cared about this. So of course they came up with the worst, most corporate possible version they could come up with and called it DEI. We all recognize that, but it's not like they wanted to do it. So in a way, all these companies immediately getting rid of it actually just shows in the first place that it was only a response to mass anti-racist agitation, that they did the least amount possible, and at the first opportunity they were able to throw it, overboard. I've said a lot, but I think your point is right. I mean, from 1690, when they first started introducing the difference between white and Black people into the laws, to now, the ruling class in the United States is essentially predicated on racism. And I know that's hard for some people to hear, but it's easy to prove. It's very easy to prove. That's why literally almost every single negative thing you could think about is disproportionately Black and Native American. So if that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what does.
Oh God, it's just so crazy because even I was just thinking as you were talking about DEI, even the whole DEI industry that's been created, a lot of it is just white people making money too. Off of,
totally. White fragility, Robin DiAngelo, all these people.
Yeah. So it's just it just shows you it's not something that I necessarily think is so harmful. It's more just like you said, doing the least so that people will just stop complaining about racism. But at the end of the day, it's also a good way to distract people. Again, it goes back to distraction. This is just one of those the divisive issues that the ruling class likes to implant in everybody's brains. And you literally, it kind of works. I mean, when you have major media outlets, I know we don't watch Fox News, but a lot of people do. And when a significant portion of the day on Fox News is spent blaming DEI for everything that goes wrong anywhere, which is just blatantly racist. It's people are going to believe that who are watching it instead of the fact that Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and all the other techno-feudal lords that control our means of communication are literally hoarding their wealth and building survivalist cave mansions and preparing to leave the earth as they burn this one with the rest of us still on it.
No, it's such a good point. And it's, I'm actually glad you brought up that point about the DEI industry, because in many ways, it's almost like the mirror image of the Dinesh D'Souza's of the world, if people remember that name, conservative person who, his whole thing in the 90s, because he was the main guy, he's a dark-skinned Indian American. And so he was the main guy they would trot out. And his main thing was, I'm not saying that there's no racism. I'm just saying that all the racism is just individuals, you know, and there's no structural racism. And when you read a lot of this like DEI stuff, it's the mirror image of that, actually. It's actually saying like the real problem is like, you know, I'm just bashing Robin DiAngelo because I know her name, but like white fragility, you know, or even the guy, Ibram Kendi, you know, it's like white people have to like, you know, reckon with their own issues and that'll change everything. I mean, of course, anyone who's racist, I invite you to please revisit your racism. I would love for you to do that. But it's gotten so far away from the historical movement of the civil rights movement around the issue of affirmative action, which was, you know, we want people to change their attitudes, but it's not about attitudes, it's about access to power, which is access to opportunities and resources. And then like what we're saying as a civil rights movement, and the many millions of white people, by the way, who are supporting the civil rights movement, who also agreed with this, including many major unions, even though that history has been wiped away, was like, we're going to use our political power to demand that corporate America change its practices to include the people who have been excluded for 400 years, regardless of merit. And we are going to just change the way things work. Like it's hopefully people's mind will come around, but we're not waiting for people's minds to come around. We're going to actually use political power to change things. And I think that's so much of why we even have the term DEI. Which is, you know, because affirmative action had become so demonized. And, you know, it started in affirmative action, same thing. Like when, you know, you can't have effective affirmative action without quotas. I don't have a long time to get into this here now. I did talk about it with Brian Becker on the socials program, but it's like, it's not a real thing unless you have quotas, because it's an actual, like you have to mark your progress somehow, right? But of course, many people thought quotas, because of the right-wing backlash, was taking away merit. And that is not the case. But then so people say, well, we don't want quotas anymore, you know, and then the Supreme Court ruled against quotas in a number of different decisions. And then it became, we want affirmative action, but we don't need quotas. Then it became, well, we want affirmative action, but we also need to make sure that we're not just thinking about race, blah, 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 which, okay, fine. Then it became, you know what, affirmative action, we're not for that, we're for DEI. At a certain point, we just have to stop backpedaling. The reality of this country is clear. There are only two explanations for what I just said when I said that almost everything that's disproportionately bad is disproportionately black. One explanation is that for hundreds of years, through slavery, through Jim Crow, through all forms of, you know, segregation that were existing, that black people were historically marginalized and oppressed, and that all of these different problems that disproportionately afflict the black community are a result of not only the historical, but ongoing manifestations of that marginalization and oppression. That is one answer, and a pretty logical answer. The only other answer is racist, that there is some hereditary thing or cultural thing that black people are doing that white people do not do, and all of black people's problems are their own. Now, if you believe the second thing, there's nothing I can do to help you. You should probably log off Breakthrough News. But if you believe the first thing, that slavery, that Jim Crow, that redlining, that keeping black people out of every single college, out of every single profession, out of every single, you know, high-level, high-functioning job that you could possibly imagine, even at the level of factories in the service industry, that does play some role and has played and continues to play a role in why things are bad for black people in America, there's only one solution to that problem. And that solution to that problem is to address directly these disparities that have been created by addressing the institutions that have created them and perpetuated them and forcing them to change. That's what affirmative action is. That's what it's about. It is historically just, and there is no negative impact on other people because of it. But ultimately, it's the constant backpedaling and constant apologies that are being put out there for people that have put us in this situation in the first place.
You know, I will say this too. I mean, I agree with you about the whole like making it individualized in white fragility, but there is something to be said about the fact that everything you just described institutionally also affects the way that individuals perceive things. And until you can change how they perceive things, because you literally change the foundations of how society works, you actually also need to work on that and force equality. And the reason I say that is because look everywhere, not just in America, like international institutions around the world, if it wasn't for the enforcement of equality and quotas, it really would all be white men running everything. That's just the truth. It really would. I mean, just look at the fact that, like, I'll take the Middle East, for example, or anywhere across Africa. If you're a white researcher, you can visit once and become an expert and write a book. Like, I'm being serious, and people will take you
Mhm.
seriously. You will get invited to come speak about these like zoos that you went to go visit in the global south. Whereas like there's just an automatic credibility that you get because of societal indoctrination on an international scale. And so I think it's all important. I actually think it's perfectly fine. Do I think it means that we're freeing everybody and liberating everybody by like, lean in feminism and forcing like quotas inside corporate America? No, I don't think that's true. But I do think that that the quotas are actually important when you have such an unequal racist society at its foundation, in addition to actually changing the institutional racism that exists. Because even people, by the way, in the global south, like American white supremacist hegemony is real. It's like what Hollywood is. So even people in global south countries, without even realizing it, have like an implicit racism almost towards themselves, and like can end up viewing something coming from a white person as either more credible or like worthy of more attention. It's just the sad reality of the world we live in. And it should be addressed with policy, because policies can actually shift that. And the people who don't want to shift that don't want to change the foundational racism that comes along with capitalism, imperialism. And also they want to keep themselves in positions of power because they're all white men at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very important point, and it's something we have to just keep talking about. I mean, Rania, you and I both took the SAT, and there's a reason why all colleges have a range of SAT scores, because the SAT really doesn't measure all that much. It's like basic competence that, in addition to many other things, is a limited at best predictor of what your academic performance will be, and an even more limited to really not predictive at all of what your career success will be. And all affirmative action has ever really said is that if you have a parameter of acceptable things, like to be an air traffic controller, you must be able to do these things. If within that parameter, in a minority of circumstances, there are roughly similar applicants, that in order to correct the fact that no Black people are allowed to become air traffic controllers for decades and decades and decades, you're going to take a minority of the spots and say, well, okay, we're going to put some of the Black people who were able to meet the standards into the program so we can start to end this historic discrimination, then, it's obvious, it's logical. Like it's not diluting merit. It's addressing historic and ongoing harm. I mean, in capitalism, your paycheck is your ration card. So to the extent that you are excluded as a people from all of the highest paying jobs for hundreds of years, it's obviously going to have a huge impact on you. So the only way to address that is to say, in a certain subset of cases, a minority of cases, we're going to say if there are a Black qualified applicant and a white qualified applicant, and they're basically the same, in a small number of cases, we're going to put the Black person ahead of the white person so that we can try to address this ongoing issue that has had so many negative consequences for the Black community. And to be honest with you, for everyone. But anyway, that's a whole deeper issue about that. But if people think that not having affirmative action if you're white is helping you, trust me, it's not helping you, because really the attack on affirmative action has never come with any significant expansion of social good. So it's not like they're like, oh, you know what? Let's just let everyone into college. Never happens. They just say, let's just let fewer Black people into the college. But there's not an expansion of financial aid. There's not an expansion of grants. There's not free college education. There's no expansion of social good for any other person. So in fact, the average white person still will remain locked out on the basis of income from most higher education opportunities. So it's not actually helping you. But it's making people think they're losing something they aren't losing, to make sure that a whole class of people isn't able to gain something that they actually deserve. But I'm just ranting too much now, Rania, so maybe we should end the show.
Never. But I guess we should. I guess it's that time. It's that time.
It is.
So before we get to the close, the official close, I want to remind everybody to smash that like button first and foremost, which I do appreciate. We did make it to the number of people who are viewing. And also just to remind everybody that we are an independent media outlet that is able to keep going and keep growing because of your support. So if you are able to, please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And for as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you will be contributing to the sustainability of an independent media outlet that is telling you the truth, not all those lies you hear everywhere else. That's the best I can do right now because it is 11:46 p.m.
Well, that was a great close. That was the real close. So I'll just say thank you to all of our guests. Thanks to all of our viewers. Thanks to all of our patrons. For myself, for Rania, for the whole BT News team. We will see you next time.